Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on Pod TV, first one this year. Happy New Year to everybody. And my name is Sasha Starr, and my guest today is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here. Happy New Year to you too.
Thank you so much. This last few days were absolutely horrible. That Russians now strike Ukraine with the something what could be compared only as a total destruction, which hasn't been heard since the Second World War, with the bombardments of Dresden, Hamburg, and other cities. I can't really. Maybe the only thing that Russians are still not on that level simply because they're not producing enough missiles and bombs.
Right.
Because if they would inflict a much more severe damage to
Well, their
Ukraine.
destructive intent is certainly not lacking. They certainly have the intent to inflict
Intent,
destruction.
yes. Oh, intent they have more than anything else. They have a lot of intent already for almost 2 years. And see, now this is something what I am trying to figure out how to deal with the dilemma that from the point of view that there should be a peace which would save a lot of lives on both sides, and it would be so great and wonderful. On the other hand, for Ukraine at least, it's of course existential war, 100%. There's no doubt about that. And how you explain the phenomena that on one hand we are trying to have a peace of some kind, at least stop the atrocities and this horrible bombardment.
There's Ivan.
Ivan, welcome to the show. So
Hello, thank you.
I'm trying to figure out how to combine these both ideas of, first of all, trying to have a peace, trying to save lives. On the other hand, from Ukrainian point of view, the only thing, at least the way I understand it, that can help Ukrainians is to simply said, I'm trying to find some better and more politically correct words, but I can't. To put it simply, as much as it sounds horrible and politically incorrect, but we're coming to the idea of killing as many Russians as possible. Okay, it's horrible idea. I mean, I think even myself, I'm from Soviet Union and I'm saying to kill as many Russians as possible. It's almost an unthinkable idea. Yet, I can't find any other words to describe that. Jonathan, maybe you can help me and clear my mind in that respect.
Well, is clear that what the Russians under Putin want is they are looking for a Carthaginian peace, essentially, with Ukraine. They want Ukraine to cease to exist as a sovereign state and be totally subservient to whatever Russia desires. That desire is fundamentally irreconcilable with the Ukrainian perception that they want nothing to do with Russia. They want Russia to go away so that the Ukraine can find its own path and peaceful productivity and relationships with the West. Those two objectives, as I've said several times before, they are politically irreconcilable. They are not subject to negotiation. There is no compromise. One side or the other must eventually give up its objective. Russia must either give up its objective of attempting to reunify a form of Russian empire, or the Ukrainians must give up their idea of wanting to exist as a sovereign nation. For Ukraine, it is non-negotiable. It is unacceptable. And for the Russians, it is equally unacceptable. So the only thing that there remains is that the issue must be settled by a war and by a victory one way or the other of one side over the other. Either the Russians must be battered into exhaustion and forced to retreat, or the Ukrainians must be prepared to to accept the consequences of just continual perpetual conflict. But it's interesting. A recent study that was published by the Institute for the Study of War has taken up the same point that I've been mentioning on, and we've been discussing on numerous past programs. They have recognized that if the Ukrainians are able to sever Crimea from Russian control, if they're able to successfully isolate the cut off the reinforcement and supply link from Russia to Crimea and break that link and isolate the Russian forces in Crimea, so that when the Ukrainians launch a counteroffensive into the Crimean Peninsula itself, that the isolated Russian defenders will be forced to surrender. Once that is accomplished, says Ukraine, the Institute for the Study of War, they conclude that the Ukraine's position will be much stronger. They will be able to divert and reallocate forces to the east and the south, away from the Crimean Peninsula, once they have it under their control. And politically speaking, this that sort of a defeat, an operational defeat, is would be the most highly visible sign to the world at large that Russia has been defeated operationally, and that they cannot hope to achieve their objective of eliminating Ukraine as a sovereign state.
Excellent. Ivan, we will start with you, but first, as I know,
your turn with a grenade, Ivan.
So
Yeah.
let's see the video.
First of all, Happy New Year. Yeah, another hard day today in Ukraine. We had a massive missile attack. Almost 100 missiles Russia shot over Ukraine, including 10 hypersonic Kinjal missiles. All of them were successfully, Kinjal missiles were successfully shot down thanks to Patriot defense system, because if they hit the targets, probably the consequences of this attack would be more devastating. But anyway, we have a lot of injured people, unfortunately, dead amongst the civilians, and you see the results of this attack. They're completely pointless. There is no military objects, and they're striking civilian residential apartments. They are striking trade centers. And you said before that from Ukrainian point of view, Sasha, Jonathan, it's not Ukrainian point of view, it's a civilized point of view. We have civilized people, civilized nations from one side, and we have completely barbaric nation, terrorist nation from the other side. And,
I stand corrected. That's, but it's a larger shared perception, not just the Ukrainian perception.
There is another point I'd like to mention, is that as much as it existential war for Ukraine and all civilized people, in a way, strangely enough, it's also existential war, if not for Russia, for Putin for sure. Because what's really happening is that he is completing this ACES of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the centerpiece of it is Russia's war against Ukraine, but also instigated war against Hamas against Israel. But Hamas against Israel is somewhat different war because there are two different civilizations, two different entities in its development, and one is way much stronger than the other one. But still, it had its positive points for Putin because he could deflect some attention from Ukrainian conflict, war to Israel conflict, and so on. Now, if he will not be able to defeat Ukraine and soundly defeat Ukraine, what kind of authoritarian posture he can have with his allies, such as Iran, North Korea, if he can, Russia, the nuclear weapon country, cannot defeat much smaller country, much weaker country by several standards, by territory, by population, by army, number of weapons, or so on. So he cannot stop, actually. He must continue this. Although he said in the last few days several overtures that he's ready for peace negotiations and so on.
He's
But
ready for peace negotiations, but only on his terms.
only, yeah. Then he adds, of course,
That's not even to be taken seriously.
it's not taken seriously. We are waiting for West, especially United States, to wake up at some point. Hopefully, it will be this month, January, and then all the story will have a very different character. Ivan, so tell me, please, how do you see this? Something bothers me that when in 2014. Russia annexed Crimea and started all this horrible things in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And then there was a proposal like Minsk 1, Minsk 2, and of course they were unacceptable to Ukraine. And I always have a thought, why, okay, the Crimea probably is gone. The Donetsk and Lugansk, I'm sorry, you know that you're from Lugansk, so I'm sorry to say that at that time, but it was 8 years ago, now it's already 9 years ago. So I thought that, okay, if Ukraine will just simply give up on Lugansk and Donetsk regions for whatever territory Russians were able already to grab, just stop there, build a wall, and say, it's okay, Russia, just take it and enjoy, and we will concentrate on building a new Ukraine and so on. But now I see that wouldn't solve the problem, that Russia would take that, but they would still bother Ukraine, and eventually, probably sooner or later, would start the war under the same pretense that they don't want Ukrainian to join NATO. But you know what's interestingly enough, as much as we all hate what Russia is doing in Ukraine, but one commentator, forgot who is that, he said that, look, Russia was so much against Ukraine joining NATO that it's ready to have their people, now it's well over 300,000, their people to be killed and yet to kill the Ukrainians in return. So they showed their resolve of not to allow Ukraine to join NATO. And looks like West doesn't have yet that resolve. Ivan, how would you comment on that?
It's not only about the NATO, and actually it started not in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea and invaded eastern part of Ukraine. It started in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, and it was another full-scale invasion, and the Russian tanks were several kilometers from the Georgian capital. Tbilisi the same, like they were in 2022 in February near Kiev. And the problem is not about NATO. The problem is that Russia doesn't want Ukraine, Georgia, and other post-Soviet countries to become successful and prosperous democratic countries, because it creates a significant threat to Russia when Russians see that people in democratic countries live better, when people have better social services, have better rights, and it goes against the imperialistic and totalitarianistic principles of Russian government. And this is about it, first of all. And we can't change our past, but we can change our future. And there is a great fault and in United States and in Western countries in 2008, 2014, that they didn't show Russia that it's not okay to behave like this in modern world, that you can just invade other countries, grab their territories, kill their people, kidnap their children, and do all that stuff what they did, and that it will not be unpunished. And now Russia sees that actually it can be unpunished, that they can continue what they're doing, they can continue their hybrid war, they can bribe Western journalists to write that Russia is still powerful, and they can struggle, they can lead this war in Ukraine for 5 years, and like Putin said, to see that they have enough resources for 5 years for this war, and Western media will gladly support these Russian narratives. From the other, but they're not logical ones, because if Russia have enough resources, then why they're begging for peace, and why from other side they're trying to make Ukraine go to another so-called Minsk agreements and to sign a peace agreement. This is illogical. So probably they don't have enough resources from one side. From other side, this war probably could be finished much faster if Ukraine had enough resources, enough weapons, or probably if NATO forces actually join this war. If United States will forgive Russia for intercepting their drones in Black Sea and saying, "Oh, it's some kind of an accident. It's okay. Russian airplanes didn't shot our drone down. It was an accident." United States are showing weakness to Russia, and this actually is the biggest problems, because Russians understand only power. If you show
just like Churchill said, that the Russians only understand force, and they can't respect weakness.
Then they will go on, and unfortunately, they from the Russian point of view, it's not everything is not so bad as it could be in the situation when the civilized world actually unites against Russia and act more seriously.
Oh, well, that could happen if West will see this pattern of Russia is not fighting itself in Ukraine, but it also provides example and encouragement for all its allies like North Korea, Iran, China, maybe China to lesser degree, but nevertheless, it's still there. Ivan, you have a good point about Russia being jealous to successful countries like Georgia and Ukraine. And I'll tell you, before 2014, I was traveling to Moscow quite often. And as a part of my activities there, I visited Ukraine. The last time I visited Ukraine, 2012. I spent about 5 days in Donetsk. I stayed in Donetsk Palace, I think it was very nice hotel there. And then I was in Kiev for about 8 days, slightly more than a week. And I stayed right on the Krishchatik in a very nice hotel there. I think also Palace Hotel, I think the name is. And I was amazed. What's a huge difference between people and their attitude and their behavior from Moscow. People were very open, friendly. You can even talk to people on the street sometimes. And in Moscow, it's impossible. People they don't want to talk to anybody. They're all scared. They're all hurry to get somewhere or from somewhere. Or whatever it is, it's a huge difference. I'll tell you. So you're absolutely right, hitting on that. And I'm thinking about what will happen if Kiev, Jonathan, as a part of your plan to sever the coordination between Russian forces on the south near Crimea, and of course, part of that strategy must be elimination of this Crimea bridge. It's that must go.
That's the most obvious vulnerable spot.
Yeah,
It's like biting the vulnerable spot on the back of a snake, on the neck of a snake.
absolutely.
Striking its most vulnerable spot.
I've read that Ukraine needs Taurus missiles to really hit and destroy Crimea bridge. I don't know if Taurus.
And they may well have they may well have the means to sever the link within the next month or so. We do not know. We are not certain. We cannot assume that we have 100% accurate knowledge about what the actual capability and intent of the Ukrainian military and political leadership is. And they're very wise to conceal it as much as possible, because the best chance that Ukraine has for reversing the situation is to strike a decisive operational blow at what would be one of Russia's weakest links in the Ukrainian theater. And I would say, to build on Ivan's earlier argument, the problem with Russia's attitude towards its neighboring states goes all the way back to really the collapse of the Soviet Union, when a fellow named Viktor Mikhailov was in charge of the Russian nuclear forces. He asserted that it was necessary for Russia to gain control of the entire former Soviet nuclear arsenal, that the nuclear forces, their nuclear forces, were in fact one of the forces cementing the Federation, cementing the Russian Federation itself. And so in the Russian perspective, their nuclear forces serve a dual purpose, political as well as military. Political, in that it serves as a unifying force, a unifying element, making Russia, in their view, a great power, and also at the same time giving the Russian leadership political, if not military, leverage over its adversaries. And so as I've argued before, the long-term solution, once a decisive operational defeat has been inflicted upon Russian military forces, the long-term solution is to build upon the existing ballistic missile defenses that Ukraine has, link them with NATO and the United States to form a global ballistic missile defense system, which will effectively neutralize the one thing that, in the Russian view, makes them a great power and gives them leverage and relevance: their nuclear missile arsenal. In fact, there have been increasing articles in the number of articles that talk about how reliable are the Russian nuclear forces, given the fact that they obviously spend a lot less relative to the United States on the maintenance and operation of their nuclear forces and their reliability. There is every reason to suspect that Russia's nuclear missile forces may not function nearly as well when push comes to shove. If they actually have to use them, then of course we can't gamble on that. However, if we are able to reinforce and build a credible global ballistic missile defense, we will introduce a great deal of uncertainty into the minds of Russian strategic planners.
Jonathan, I would like to add something interesting. is that most intercontinental ballistic missiles in Russia, they're all managed by ethnic Ukrainians because they don't trust their own people. They believe that Ukrainians who build most of these missiles, and of course they know a great deal of how to maintain them properly and so on, and they still don't trust their own Russians, whether they're Buryats or Mongols or whoever they are, to manage these missiles.
And we can increase that uncertainty by simply on our part, building a much more credible and robust ballistic missile defense. Link it with an upgrade to the U.S. Space Force,
John,
and you will have a very powerful deterrent.
Hopefully, they're already doing that. Although,
yes, like I say, I cannot speak.
Yeah.
for what is going on behind the scenes. I do not know. Honestly, do not know. And even if I did, I wouldn't be mentioning any on this program. But based on what I have studied of the Russian perception, what I'll repeat it again, what the Russian leadership fears most, more than anything else, even if they won't directly admit it in public, their actions and their past writings betray their true perception. They fear the potential of American technology to neutralize the one thing that makes them relevant and a great power.
Jonathan, one question I would like to ask you, that it seems to me that the West, and especially the United States, policy, the world policy, is somewhat Moscow-centric. Somehow Moscow was always in the center of all other issues and so on. And that is one reason why it's not first time that Russia or Soviet Union invade other countries. Remember what's happened in 1956 in Hungary and 68 in Czechoslovakia at the time. However, at that time, it was a big old Soviet Union against some very small countries which were part of the Warsaw Pact. So it was almost like internal Russian,
and also an understood, recognized sphere of influence.
And don't forget, Russians were very clever that they not invaded, for example, Czechoslovakia just by themselves. They involved Eastern Germany and Poland and a few other countries, Romania, I think, maybe somebody else. And so it was like internal Warsaw Pact maneuvers or
right. And from the United States perspective at that time, our grand strategy of containment, versus containment did not call for the United States and the West to attempt to roll back or liberate countries that were already under Soviet control. What the containment strategy was counting on, according to George Kennan, was if we simply prevented them or made them unable to expand any further, and to keep them from achieving either through subversion or conquest what they could not otherwise achieve, that eventually the Soviet Union would buckle under the internal stresses of its own internal contradictions. And history proved George Kennan correct.
Right. Remember that with Kissinger and Nixon, that came a year of detente.
Detente, yes.
Detente. And what was it, in opinion of Nixon and Kissinger, the idea of containment is no longer enough and they needed something else to replace it, or to add to containment also the element of detente? And then detente probably ceased to exist when Russia invaded, or Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, the Russians, as a matter of fact, the Russians, when I was looking at the Russian perception, Soviet perception of U.S. doctrine and policy, the Russians saw the Nixon's and Kissinger's détente policy as a retreat. As a retreat in U.S. policy, a retreat that had been forced upon it by the growth of Soviet nuclear power. The conclusion was that the more the Soviets increased their nuclear strategic forces, the more the United States and the West would be forced to adjust and accommodate themselves to the growth of Soviet nuclear power. You might say that this perception reached its zenith when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, because at that point, the growth of Soviet nuclear forces was at its height. And the Soviets had you could say that the Soviets even had a marginal degree of superiority in numerical forces in terms of nuclear forces vis-a-vis the United States. And so at that time, the Soviets leadership saw their greatest degree of freedom possible to use their own military forces in support of their foreign policy objectives, because they saw the United States as being effectively restrained.
Tell me, a lot of our listeners probably were not even alive at that time,
No.
including Ivan, by the way. Tell me,
Oh, well.
is there any correlation between what's happened with the Iran installment of Ayatollah regime and dethronement of the Shah, and then a few months later invasion of USSR into Afghanistan? Is there, like, it's happened almost at the same time, and what were the reasons for both of them?
That I couldn't really tell you.
Well, Russians
Something
explained with Afghanistan that they were scared that United States almost any day will invade Afghanistan and will make it their own sphere of influence. And Soviet Union, from strategic point of view, wanted to prevent that. That's the same thing what they're doing now in Ukraine. They want to prevent Ukraine joining NATO, and therefore they...
And instead, now what their actions have resulted in the strengthening of NATO, the galvanizing of NATO, and the joining of Sweden and Finland joining NATO. So that, I mean, if they're trying to decrease NATO's expansion, well, they certainly failed at that. And it's not even a given that they will be able to prevent Ukraine from eventually joining NATO. Yeah, what is key here, though, is Ukraine still holds its destiny in its own hands, and if they are able to inflict through an operational surprise, inflict a decisive and politically visible operational defeat upon Russian forces, then the political dynamic changes. And as the Institute for the Study of War has pointed out, the severing of the link and the recovery of Crimea from Russian occupation, that is the single most visible defeat that would change the nature of this war.
Ivan, the question to you is how solid positions of Zelensky and Zaluzhny are at present, because there are a lot of commentators who are not happy with one of them or both of them or so on. Yet Zaluzhny is being actually touted as the next NATO commander-in-chief, and never, of course, Zelensky is one of the most popular people in the world. So what's your view on that?
I'm not, unfortunately, friend of Zaluzhny or of Zelensky, and I'm not close to them to know what is actually going on between them, and is there some kind of conflict. But I see that this so-called conflict is actively being pushed by Russian propaganda and Russian informational attacks, both in Ukrainian media and the world ones. And from Ukrainian history, unfortunately, we know that Ukrainians were always defeated because of such internal conflicts, when Ukrainian generals, Ukrainian politicians started to discuss and to struggle against each other instead of uniting and struggling against the external enemy, Russia, because always the major enemy of Ukraine, of Ukrainian democracy, was Russia. And I hope that Ukrainians at last learned from our history that until we win this war, we should be united.
Well, the last thing what I would like to mention is that just a moment. The U.S. representative in Ukraine, in its internal handling of foreign help, especially with sooner or later upcoming rebuilding of Ukraine, the heir of Pritzker family, Penny Pritzker, who is an incredibly intelligent person and businesswoman, representing multi-billionaire family of Pritzker, which hails from Ukraine, by the way. She is in charge of all the Western help that will come to Ukraine, will go through her, and no dollar or penny will go somewhere around her. So that would help to instill the confidence in American and Western investors, or help, or humanitarian help, or missile help, or arms help, the weapons, and so on. And I think that should have been done a long time ago. That what something will stop, I hope, once and for all the talking about misappropriation of money, which gives all kind of excuses to people in U.S. government and political parties to oppose help to Ukraine or decreasing help to Ukraine or so on. Hopefully it will work out. And especially I expect that in January, all these frictions between major parties, Republicans and Democrats, will be overcome, and hopefully that will be formulation of new initiative of helping Ukraine, headed by United States, and Europe will participate all the way. Somebody trying to get in touch with me. Anyway, I know who it is. Anyway, I would like to end our program on a positive note, that Ukraine will prevail. It will take some time. It will take some effort. It's Ukrainian people, Ukrainian society at large, which is fantastic. It's armed forces, which are fantastic, even double fantastic. And there is a government of Ukraine, which hopefully will get there one day or another. Okay. With that, I would like to thank you very much for participating in our program, and we'll see you on Friday, same place, same time.
Looking forward to it.
Bye-bye. Have a great week.